A young girl from a small town in Idaho went to school and never returned, leaving her parents' world torn apart by grief and uncertainty. But 2 years later, her mother zooms in on Google Maps and spots something shocking. The Sunday afternoon sun filtered through the curtains of the modest Airbnb in suburban New York. Rachel Warren sat on the living room sofa, her laptop open on the coffee table, her eyes heavy from the long journey from Idaho. At 36, she carried herself with the posture of someone who had been holding her breath for too long. 2 years to be exact. "Yes, we've just arrived in New York," her husband Daniel said into his phone, pacing the small living room. At 39, Daniel's once youthful face now carried deep worry lines that had formed over the past 2 years. "We're ready to start with the investigation. Yes, we can come to the station today." Rachel barely listened to her husband's conversation with the police. She focused instead on the laptop screen, typing in the address Daniel repeated from the phone call. Google Maps loaded, displaying the route from their Airbnb to the police station. "They said they'll be expecting us in about an hour," Daniel said after ending the call, running his hand through his graying hair. "I'm just looking at the area," Rachel murmured, zooming in and out on the map. They weren't familiar with New York at all. Their home was in Pine Hollow, a small town in Idaho where everyone knew each other, where children could walk to school alone, where the tragedies like theirs simply didn't happen until they did. 2 years ago, their daughter Eugene had disappeared after attending a baptism class at their local church. She was last seen walking with friends across the street to their usual hangout spot. She never made it home. The search that followed consumed their lives, transformed their marriage, and tested their faith more deeply than either could have imagined. Rachel scrolled around the map, familiarizing herself with the area surrounding their temporary home. They had specifically chosen this Airbnb for its proximity to Bryant Park, where a tip had led them. The anonymous caller was very specific, Rachel said more to herself than to Daniel. Said they saw a girl matching Eugene's description at a homeless community event near Bryant Park. It was the first credible lead they'd had in months. Previous tips had led nowhere, each one initially raising their hopes, only to crush them later. But something about this call felt different, concrete enough to justify the cross-country journey on what might be yet another wild goose chase. Rachel continued exploring the digital map, finding herself drawn to the area around Bryant Park. She noticed several small churches scattered around the neighborhood. "There are a lot of churches here," she said, a small measure of relief in her voice. "I was worried I wouldn't be able to attend service while we're here." Daniel nodded absently, unpacking his toiletry bag on the kitchen counter. Rachel understood his distance. Once a devoted man of faith, Daniel had withdrawn from church life after Eugene's disappearance. Unable to face the well-meaning but painful questions, the pitting looks, the theological platitudes that did nothing to bring their daughter back. Rachel, on the other hand, had clung more tightly to her faith, working in church administration in Pine Hollow, finding solace in prayer even as doubt gnawed at her. "I've booked us for 2 weeks," Rachel said, "but we can extend if we need to." Daniel joined her on the sofa, the cushion dipping under his weight. "Let me see what you found." Rachel showed him the police department location, Bryant Park, and the various churches she'd discovered. "I think we have a good starting point. Let's check the street view," Daniel suggested, taking over the touchpad. "I want to see what this Bryant Park looks like." Rachel watched as he navigated through the virtual streets, the familiar blue figure dragging through the digital representation of their search area. First, they viewed the community park, then began exploring the surrounding streets. "That's Mole Street," Rachel noted as they turned onto a residential road with a small church visible at the end. Daniel zoomed in closer as they approached the church, and that's when Rachel saw it. A girl in a pink hoodie walking with a man, their backs to the Google camera car. "Daniel." Rachel's voice caught in her throat, her fingers stabbing at the screen. "Look, the pink hoodie with the small decorative pattern on the back." It was identical to the one Eugene had been wearing the day she disappeared. Rachel had bought it for her 11th birthday, just 3 weeks before she vanished. It was etched in her memory like a brand. "Honey, turn it around," she urged, her heart racing. "See if we can see their faces." Daniel manipulated the controls, trying to find another angle, but the faces were blurred out, as was standard in Google Maps Street View. They were only visible in a few frames, always from behind or at an angle that revealed nothing conclusive. Something about that man seems familiar, Rachel whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Daniel sighed, his shoulders slumping. Rachel, this is the 100th time you've spotted a girl in a pink hoodie. You've become fixated on that outfit. But I know how badly you want to find her, he said gently. I do too, but we can't jump at every pink sweater we see. Rachel marked all the points of interest on the map anyway, then closed her laptop. Daniel was right. They needed to be methodical, not impulsive. They had a plan. We should go, Daniel said, standing up. Let's not waste any more daylight. We'll go to the station first, talk to the police, get permission to put up missing person posters, and then check out Bryant Park with an officer. Rachel nodded, collecting the stack of freshly printed posters from their suitcase. Each one featured Eugene's smiling face, her bright eyes, her long hair, and the details of her disappearance. 2 years of distributing these posters had worn a groove in Rachel's heart, but she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. As they headed to the car, Rachel couldn't shake the image of the pink hoodie on Mole Street. A mother knows, she thought to herself. A mother always knows. Rachel drove carefully through the unfamiliar New York streets, following the blue line on her phone's GPS. Daniel sat beside her, reviewing the case notes they'd compiled for the local police. Turn right at the next light, the robotic voice instructed. As they approached the intersection, Rachel realized they were passing Bryant Park. Look, she said, slowing down slightly. That's the park from the tip. The park was vibrant, even in the late afternoon. Children playing, couples walking hand in hand, a small gathering near a gazebo that might have been a community event, similar to the one described in the anonymous tip. Rachel felt an urge to stop, to get out, and search every face to call Eugene's name, until her voice gave out. We'll come back later, son. Settle. Yo reminded her gently, sensing her thoughts. On our own, it might be fruitless. We need the help of trained eyes. Rachel nodded reluctantly and continued driving. But as they approached the next turn, she spotted a street sign, Mole Street, and without thinking, she signaled and turned. What are you doing? Daniel asked, his voice sharpening. This is the wrong way. Rachel kept her eyes on the road. I want to visit the church we saw on Google Maps just for a moment. Rachel, I need to pray, Daniel, she said, though they both knew that wasn't the full truth. Just a short prayer before we talk to the police. Daniel leaned back against the headrest, his frustration evident. There won't be a service at this time of day. We're wasting precious time. You can pray in the car. God will hear you regardless. He's not confined to church buildings. His voice took on a hint of bitterness. You know that doctrine well enough. Rachel remained silent, her eyes scanning the street, looking for any sign of a pink hoodie, any familiar faces. The street was quiet in the late afternoon lull. You just wanted to check the street, didn't you? Daniel said, not really asking. Where you saw that girl walking. I know you, Rachel, but you won't find them there. Those were just past satellite images. I know, Rachel admitted quietly, but I just felt this pull. I can't explain it. The police will always be at the station, but I needed to respond to this call in my heart. Daniel studied his wife's profile, noticing the determined set of her jaw that had become so familiar over the past 2 years. He'd learned when to push and when to surrender, and he recognized this as one of the latter moments. The church came into view, a small brick building with a white cross above the entrance. Rachel pulled into the nearly empty parking lot and turned off the engine. I'll wait outside, Daniel said, unbuckling his seatbelt. I need some fresh air and let the police know we'll be a bit late. Rachel watched him exit the car. His tall frame stooped slightly with the weight of their shared burden. They had once moved in perfect sync, their marriage a dance of mutual support and understanding. Now they often felt like strangers sharing a tragedy, each processing their grief in ways the other couldn't fully comprehend. She gathered her purse and a small Bible she always carried, Eugene's name inscribed on the leather cover, a gift for her 10th birthday. The binding was worn from Rachel's daily readings, from the desperate prayers whispered into its pages. As Rachel approached the church entrance, a sense of both trepidation and strange certainty washed over her. She couldn't explain the feeling, not to Daniel, not to herself, but something had drawn her to this specific place. Whether it was divine guidance or a mother's intuition, she was going to follow it. She pulled open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, leaving Daniel to make his apologetic call to the police across the street. The cool, dim interior welcomed her like an old friend. The familiar scent of candles and polished wood a comfort even in this strange city. The church interior was quiet, with sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. Rachel stood for a moment, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimmer light after the bright afternoon outside. A middle-aged man in casual clothes was cleaning one of the pews, methodically wiping down the wood with a cloth. No congregation was present, confirming Daniel's assumption about the timing of services. Rachel slowly approached her footsteps, echoing in the empty sanctuary. "Excuse me?" she said softly. The man looked up, offering a friendly smile. "Hello there. Can I help you?" "I hope so," Rachel said, pulling out her phone. "I'm looking for information about a girl and a man I saw in this area." She opened Google Maps and showed him the blurred Street View image she'd saved. "I know it's not very clear, but I wondered if you might recognize them." The staff member squinted at the screen, studying the pixelated figures. His brow furrowed with concentration. "It's hard to tell with the blurring, but something about them does look familiar." He handed the phone back. "Are they friends of yours?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. "I'm trying to find my daughter. She's been missing for 2 years, and I'm following every possible lead." The man's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that. I... Before he could finish, the door to a back office opened, and 2 men stepped out. They were engaged in conversation, both wearing the distinctive clerical collars of Protestant ministers. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she studied the second man. "Thank you for your help," she said hastily to the staff member, then made her way toward the 2 priests. The pastor in the formal robe noticed her approach and paused his conversation. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "Yes." "Hello," Rachel said, extending her hand. "I was just admiring your beautiful church." "Pastor Graham," the man introduced himself, shaking her hand. "I'm the senior pastor here. This is Evangelist Matthew, who's been guest preaching for us these past 2 weeks." "Evangelist Matthew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The minister looked at her with a moment of blank confusion before his expression cleared. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" Rachel stepped closer. "I'm Rachel Warren from Pine Hollow, Idaho. I work at First Protestant Church there. I was part of the team that invited you to preach at our Sunday service a few years ago." She smiled, trying to jog his memory. "I arranged your accommodations and helped with all the logistics for your visit." Evangelist Matthew continued to look at her with polite confusion. Rachel pressed on. "You led our prayer group and did an altar call. A woman in a wheelchair was healed. It was quite remarkable. Everyone talked about it for months." A flash of recognition, or what appeared to be recognition, crossed his face. "Ah, yes, Rachel Warren, of course. What a blessed event that was." He smiled broadly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? I never forget a healing. Though sometimes the faces of those who assist blur together after so many church visits." Rachel nodded, understanding a traveling evangelist like Matthew would visit dozens of churches every year. "It's a pleasure to see you again. Are you serving here now?" "Just a guest pastor." Matthew explained, his voice warm and confident. "I'm here for 2 weeks before continuing my church tour. This is actually my final day. I'll be preaching at the evening service tonight, then catching a night flight out of New York. What an incredible coincidence to meet you here." Rachel said, though in her heart, she wondered if it was coincidence at all. Perhaps this was what had drawn her to this particular church. God's hand guiding her steps. Indeed, Matthew agreed. What brings you to New York so far from home? Rachel's smile faltered. My daughter Eugene. She went missing 2 years ago, shortly after your visit to our church. Actually, she pulled out one of the posters from her bag, unfolding it to show them Eugene's photograph. We received a tip that someone saw a girl matching her description near Bryant Park. My husband and I came immediately. Evangelist Matthew stared at the photo, his expression unreadable for a moment. He seemed to stiffen slightly, though Rachel wasn't certain if she was imagining it. Pastor Graham moved forward, placing a comforting hand on Rachel's arm. Oh, my dear, what a terrible ordeal for your family. Let us pray together for Eugene's safe return. The three of them formed a small circle. Pastor Graham, taking Rachel's hand in his, Evangelist Matthew joined after a slight hesitation. Pastor Graham led a heartfelt prayer for Eugene's safety and for God's guidance in the search. When they finished, Evangelist Matthew stepped forward and embraced Rachel. The hug was friendly at first, but then tightened, almost as if he was holding her in place. Rachel felt a moment of discomfort as he seemed to inhale deeply, as though taking in her scent. Something about the gesture felt invasive, inappropriate. Not at all like the comforting embrace of a spiritual leader. As they separated, Rachel noticed something strange. In the breast pocket of Matthew's suit, partially visible for just a split second, was what appeared to be a photograph. The image was facing inward, but the paper was thin enough that Rachel could make out the silhouette of what looked like a young girl. Before she could process what she'd seen, Matthew straightened his jacket, noticing the protruding edge of the photo, and quickly tucking it deeper into his pocket. A photo of my daughter, he explained smoothly. I carry it everywhere. She's always in my heart. Rachel nodded, trying to hide her unease. The silhouette had looked familiar. Too familiar. We'll certainly mention your daughter to our congregation at tonight's service, Pastor Graham assured her. Many eyes are better than few when searching for someone. Thank you, Rachel said, gathering her composure. I should go. My husband is waiting, and we need to get to the police station. As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way Evangelist Matthew had reacted to Eugene's photo, the strange embrace. The glimpse of the photograph in his pocket, all of it sent warning signals through her mind. But surely she was being paranoid. This was a man of God, respected in many churches across the country. Still, as she walked toward the exit, Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the church's air conditioning. Rachel stepped out of the church into the warm afternoon sun, her mind racing. The suspicion that had taken root inside couldn't be easily dismissed, no matter how irrational it might seem to others, to Daniel especially. She spotted her husband sitting in their rental car, the driver's side door open to catch the breeze. His expression was thunderous, and she steeled herself for his frustration. What took you so long? Daniel demanded as she approached. You've wasted 30 minutes on this detour. The police are waiting for us. Rachel slid into the driver's seat, but kept the door open. Daniel, you won't believe who I just met inside. Evangelist Matthew, the one who visited our church in Pine Hollow about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared. Daniel looked unimpressed. So there's something off about him, Rachel insisted, lowering her voice despite being alone in the car. When I hugged him, he held me too tight, like he was, I don't know, smelling me or something. And he had a photograph in his pocket. I only saw it for a second, but the silhouette looked like Eugene. Rachel, Daniel began his tone, suggesting he was about to dismiss her concerns. I know how it sounds, she interrupted, but I'm not imagining things. When I showed him Eugene's photo, he reacted strangely. He seemed startled. Daniel's expression softened slightly as he registered the urgency in her voice. Look, we've served in church together for years. We know how respected evangelists like him are. If what you're suggesting is true, it would shock a lot of people. You need to be absolutely certain before making any kind of accusation. I'm not saying I'm certain, Rachel clarified. I'm just saying something doesn't feel right. Daniel rubbed his temples, clearly torn between supporting his wife and maintaining rationality. Let's just go to the police station as planned. They're waiting for us. We can sort all this out there. If your suspicions have any merit, they'll know how to proceed. Rachel nodded reluctantly. You're right. With police presence, we can always ask Pastor Graham for the evangelist's contact information later if needed. Before they could continue their discussion, the church doors opened and evangelist Matthew emerged. He waved goodbye to Pastor Graham, saying something about returning before the evening service, then spotted Rachel and Daniel and offered a friendly wave as he walked to his car, which was parked next to theirs. As Matthew opened his car door, Rachel was hit by a familiar scent wafting from the vehicle's interior, a sweet vanilla fragrance that she recognized instantly. It was Eugene's favorite perfume, the one Rachel had given her for Christmas the year before she disappeared. Eugene had worn it daily, cherishing it as her grown-up smell. Rachel felt her blood turn to ice. This couldn't be a coincidence. Matthew reversed out of his parking space and drove away, seemingly unaware of the bombshell he just dropped in Rachel's lap. Get in the car, Rachel said urgently, already climbing back into the driver's seat. Close the door. Daniel complied, confused by her sudden intensity. What is it? Didn't you smell it? Rachel asked, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Smell what? When he opened his car door, that vanilla scent. It's Eugene's perfume, the one I gave her that she wore every day. Daniel stared at his wife, concern evident in his expression. Rachel, you're connecting dots that might not be there. Vanilla is an extremely common scent. It could be his daughter's perfume or his wife's, or even an air freshener. Rachel turned the key in the ignition. I feel a call in my heart about this, Daniel. A strong one. I need to follow it. And go where chase after a respected evangelist based on a smell. I just want to confirm it. The call, Rachel insisted. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it, and we'll go straight to the police station as planned. But I need to do this. Daniel threw up his hands in exasperation. Now you're spiritualizing everything. This is exactly how false prophets gain followings in this country. People following gut feelings and call instead of reason. The accusation stung, especially coming from Daniel. Rachel reversed out of the parking space, her jaw set in determination. I'm not claiming to be a prophet. I'm a mother who's worked in church administration long enough to know when something doesn't add up with a pastor. Daniel turned to stare out the window, his posture rigid with frustration. Fine, do whatever you want, but when you embarrass yourself because of this wild goose chase, don't say I didn't warn you. The car filled with tense silence as Rachel pulled onto Mole Street, following in the direction the evangelist had gone. Her heart pounded in her chest, torn between fear of being right and fear of being wrong. If she was mistaken, she was delaying their meeting with the police for nothing. But if she was right, they might finally find Eugene. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel and pressed on following the instinct that had brought her to this moment, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced. Rachel maintained a careful distance behind Evangelist Matthew's car, making sure to stay far enough back that he wouldn't notice them following. Daniel sat beside her in stony silence, his arms crossed over his chest, his disagreement radiating from every pore. This is ridiculous, he muttered after several minutes. We can't call the police because we have nothing but your suspicions and a vanilla scent. We're wasting valuable time. Just bear with me. Rachel pleaded, her eyes fixed on the evangelist's sedan. If I'm wrong, I'll never do something like this again. They followed the car into a residential neighborhood where the houses were larger and more spaced out than in the area around their Airbnb. Finally, Matthew pulled into the driveway of an attractive two-story home with a well-maintained garden. An Airbnb board stood outside. Rachel drove past slowly, then parked around the corner where they could still observe the house without being obvious. She killed the engine and waited. Now what? Daniel asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Now we watch, Rachel said simply. Matthew exited his car and went into the house, closing the door behind him. Minutes ticked by in silence as Rachel and Daniel sat in their parked car, the tension between them thickening. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the front door opened again. A woman emerged, carrying 2 large suitcases, which she loaded into the trunk of Matthew's car. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional-looking bun. She disappeared back into the house, only to reappear moments later with a smaller suitcase child-sized. He said he was leaving New York tonight after the service. Rachel whispered as though the woman might hear them from this distance. The woman went back inside, and shortly afterward returned to the doorway with a young girl. The child looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, with blonde hair and neat pigtails. The girl gave Evangelist Matthew a kiss on the cheek as he appeared in the doorway behind her, and he hugged her briefly before waving goodbye. As the girl turned to walk to the car with the woman, Rachel strained to see her face, hoping against hope. But it wasn't Eugene. The features were all wrong, the hair color different, the build much smaller than Eugene would be now after 2 years. "See," Daniel said softly, though without triumph. That must be his daughter, just like he said. Rachel's hope deflated like a punctured balloon. She had been so certain, so convinced that her instincts were leading her toward Eugene. Now she felt foolish, exactly as Daniel had predicted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "I really thought I was so sure." Daniel's expression softened as he placed a hand on her arm. "It's okay. You're a mother looking for her child. Anyone would grasp at straws in your position." Rachel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The photograph she'd glimpsed the vanilla scent. Had she imagined their significance? Had grief and desperation led her to create connections where none existed? "Let's switch seats," Daniel suggested gently. "I'll drive us to the police station." They got out and exchanged places. Rachel slumping into the passenger seat, emotionally drained by the roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Daniel started the car, but didn't immediately put it in gear. "Rachel, I need you to set the Google Maps to the police station. I have no idea where we are." Rachel pulled out her phone, her movements mechanical as she typed in the address. The familiar blue line appeared, guiding them back toward their original destination. As Daniel began to drive, Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the evangelist's house until it disappeared from view. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something vital, that a piece of the puzzle was still eluding her. But for now, she had to accept that her suspicions had led nowhere. It was time to return to their plan to meet with the police, who might actually help them find Eugene. Rachel leaned her head against the window, watching the unfamiliar New York landscape slide by. 2 years of searching, of following leads that went nowhere, of enduring the pitying looks from friends and family who had long since given up hope. It had worn her down to her core. Yet something inside her refused to surrender, refused to accept that Eugene might never come home. That something, call it faith, call it maternal instinct, had brought them across the country on the slim chance of finding their daughter. And despite this latest disappointment, Rachel knew she would continue following it wherever it led for as long as it took, because a mother never stopped searching for her child. Never. Rachel continued to watch the road, still keeping an eye out for the evangelist's car. So far, it seemed they were headed in the same general direction out of the residential area and back toward the main thoroughfares. "Look," Rachel said suddenly, pointing ahead. "They're turning." Daniel sighed, but slowed down slightly, watching as the car carrying the woman and the young girl turned into what appeared to be a playground with an attached cafe. Through the chain-link fence, Rachel could see several children gathered outside, seemingly waiting. "Daniel, slow down more," Rachel urged. "I want to see what's happening." "No," Daniel said, firmly accelerating instead. "No more side missions, Rachel. We're already late for our appointment with the police. We're going straight there now." Rachel craned her neck, trying to see as much as possible as they drove past the playground. She caught a glimpse of the woman greeting another adult, the small girl joining a group of waiting children. But then they were past it, the scene disappearing behind them. She slumped back in her seat, her hope deflating once more. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but no." He interrupted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We need to learn from this, Rachel. Gut feelings can be misleading. They can make us see connections that aren't there." Rachel fell silent, knowing he was right, but unable to shake the nagging feeling that they had missed something important. The vanilla scent, the photograph, the suitcases, it all meant something. She was sure of it, but without concrete evidence, she couldn't expect Daniel or the police to take her seriously. They drove in tense silence for several minutes before Daniel spoke again, his voice gentler. "I know how badly you want to find her. I do too. But we need to be methodical to work with the authorities." "I know," Rachel whispered, staring out the window. When they finally arrived at the police station, it was nearly an hour later than their scheduled appointment time. They entered the busy precinct, approaching the front desk officer. "We have an appointment with Detective Morris," Daniel explained about our missing daughter, Eugene Warren. "We're a bit late, I'm afraid." The officer checked his computer, then glanced up with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but Detective Morris is in another meeting right now. He had to move on when you didn't arrive at the scheduled time." Daniel shot Rachel a pointed look before turning back to the officer. "How long until he's available?" "Probably a few hours," the officer replied. "You're welcome to wait, or you could come back later." Daniel thanked him and guided Rachel back outside, his frustration evident in every line of his body. "See what happens when we waste time," he said once they were outside. "Now we have ours to kill." Rachel nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Truly." His expression softened slightly at her genuine remorse. The officer mentioned there's a diner nearby. "I haven't eaten since breakfast, and I'm guessing you haven't either." "You go ahead," Rachel suggested. "I think I need to walk around a bit. Clear my head. There are some interesting architectural buildings around here." Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between staying with her and giving her space. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Take your phone and stay in touch. I'll text you when the detective is ready to see us." Rachel watched as Daniel walked toward the diner across the street, his shoulders slumped with the weight of their shared burden. She felt a pang of guilt for the wild goose chase she'd led him on, for the delay that had cost them their appointment, for the hope she'd raised only to have it dashed. But underneath that guilt, the suspicion still gnawed at her. She couldn't let it go, not yet. Rachel began walking, allowing her feet to carry her without a specific destination in mind. The streets around the police station were busy with midday activity, but she barely noticed the people passing by. Her thoughts consumed by the morning's events. She pulled out her phone and opened Google Maps again, returning to the street view image that had started all of this. The girl in the pink hoodie and the man walking beside her. She zoomed in as much as the pixelated image would allow, studying every detail. Something about the man's posture, the way he held himself. She was sure it was Evangelist Matthew. The more she stared at the image, the more certain she became. Acting on impulse, Rachel dialed a number from her contacts. Melissa, a fellow church staff member back in Pine Hollow, who had worked closely with her for years. Melissa answered on the third ring. "Is everything okay? Did you find Eugene?" "Not yet." Rachel replied, continuing to walk as she spoke. "But I need your help. Do you remember Evangelist Matthew?" "He visited our church about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared." "Of course I remember him. The healing service was incredible." "I need you to find everything you can about him," Rachel explained. "His background, his seminary education, anything you can dig up. Also, that woman in the wheelchair who was healed, what was her name?" "Can you find her contact information?" She filled out a visitor card, and we recorded her testimony afterward. "I can look through the archives," Melissa promised. "But what's this about Rachel? I'm not sure yet." Rachel admitted. "But I've run into the evangelist here in New York, and something doesn't feel right. Call it intuition. I'll see what I can find and call you back," Melissa said. "Be careful, Rachel." After ending the call, Rachel continued walking, her eyes scanning her surroundings more attentively now. She passed several impressive buildings, her architectural interest momentarily overriding her troubled thoughts. At an intersection, a large building caught her eye. A sign outside identified it as a Lutheran dormitory, with a vast green yard stretching along its side. Rachel crossed the street for a closer look, curious about the facility. In her experience, Lutheran dormitories were uncommon. Catholic monasteries were more typical. Taking out her phone, she snapped a few photos of the interesting building. Perhaps she could visit the dormitory office and ask about its history. It would help pass the time while waiting for Detective Morris to become available. As she approached the entrance, a familiar car pulled into the dormitory's parking lot. Rachel stopped in her tracks, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Evangelist Matthew's car, but Matthew himself wasn't driving. Instead, it was the woman from the Airbnb with the small blonde girl visible in the passenger seat. Rachel ducked behind a large shrub, watching as the woman parked and exited the vehicle. She left the door open, standing beside the car as though waiting for something. Minutes later, a dormitory keeper in a Lutheran nun-style uniform emerged from the building, leading a small group of children. Each child carried a small suitcase similar to the one Rachel had seen the woman loading into the car earlier. The children lined up beside the vehicle as the woman helped them load their suitcases into the trunk. Rachel counted 5 children in total, all appearing to be between 7 and 12 years old. And then, like a miracle, like an answer to 2 years of desperate prayers, Rachel saw her. Eugene, her daughter's face older, the missing person posters, but unmistakable. Her hair was shorter now, but the eyes, the mouth, the small dimple in her cheek when she smiled. Rachel would recognize them anywhere. For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Time seemed to stand still as she stared at her daughter alive, and only yards away, after 2 endless years of searching. With trembling hands, Rachel reached for her phone and called Daniel. "Rachel," he answered immediately. "Daniel," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "I found her. I found Eugene. Get the car and come to me now. I'm sharing my location." "What? Where are you?" "It's her, Daniel. I'm sure of it. She's getting into a car with that woman from the evangelist's house. Please hurry and call the police." She ended the call and quickly shared her location with Daniel, then turned her attention back to the scene unfolding in the parking lot. The woman was ushering the children into the car, preparing to leave. Rachel couldn't wait for Daniel or the police. If that car drove away with Eugene inside, she might lose her daughter all over again. Taking a deep breath, Rachel stepped out from her hiding place and ran toward the group, calling out as she approached, "Eugene, Eugene." The woman at the car saw her coming and reacted with alarm, quickly telling the children to get inside and closing the doors. She rushed to the driver's seat, thanking the dormitory keeper, who stood by looking confused by the sudden commotion. Before the woman could start the engine, Rachel reached the car and pounded on the window, her eyes locked on her daughter in the back seat. Eugene's expression transformed from confusion to shock. She rolled down the window, her eyes wide. "Mom, is that you?" Then turning to the woman in the driver's seat, Eugene asked in a bewildered voice, "Did God make my mom alive again?" The woman started to say something, but Rachel was already opening the back door, gathering Eugene into her arms. The feeling so familiar, yet so desperately missed, that it brought tears streaming down her face. "It's really me, sweetheart," Rachel whispered into her daughter's hair. "I'm alive, and I've been looking for you every day since you disappeared." The dormitory keeper approached, clearly confused by the scene. "What's going on here?" Rachel looked up, her arms still wrapped tightly around Eugene, as though she might vanish again if she let go. "This is my daughter. She was kidnapped from our hometown in Idaho 2 years ago. We've been searching for her ever since." The dormitory keeper's face palled at Rachel's words, her eyes darting between Rachel, Eugene, and the woman in the driver's seat. "I don't understand. These children are under the care of Pastor Matthew's ministry. They're orphans he's taken in." Before Rachel could respond, a car screeched to a halt at the entrance of the parking lot. Daniel leapt out, his eyes frantically scanning the area until they landed on Rachel and the girl in her arms. "Eugene," he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Eugene turned at the sound, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Dad, you're alive too." Daniel ran to them, enveloping both Rachel and Eugene in a tight embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs. "You found her," he whispered to Rachel. "You actually found her." Meanwhile, the woman in the driver's seat closed her door and appeared to be making a phone call, probably to the evangelist. Her movements hurried and nervous. She started the engine, clearly intending to leave with the other children still in the car. Daniel broke away from the embrace and strode to the front of the vehicle, slamming his fist on the hood. "Don't you dare move this car," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. The wail of police sirens filled the air as multiple patrol cars converged on the scene, responding to Daniel's emergency call. Officers emerged, weapons drawn, quickly assessing the volatile situation. "Police, everyone stay where you are," one officer commanded, approaching cautiously. Daniel raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "My name is Daniel Warren. That's my wife Rachel, and we've just found our daughter Eugene, who was kidnapped 2 years ago. This woman," he pointed to the driver, "is involved in her abduction." Police secured the scene, quickly helping the other frightened children out of the car. The dormitory keeper attempted to calm them, clearly as shocked by the unfolding events as the children themselves. She admitted she's the evangelist's assistant. An officer informed Rachel and Daniel as they stood protectively near Eugene. "Says these children are part of his ministry and discipleship program, but not his biological children. They're kept here at the dormitory during his 2 service." Rachel held Eugene close. "This is my missing daughter and these other children. They're likely taken from their families, too." The police nodded grimly. "We'll need to confirm that at the station." Officers checked each child, ensuring none were physically harmed before arranging for transport to the police station. The dormitory keeper agreed to accompany them, informing her staff of her absence. "Where is the evangelist now?" an officer asked the assistant. "He's resting at the Airbnb," she replied, looking panicked. "He told me to take Mila and the other children with his luggage somewhere near the airport. He said he'd join us after the evening service." Rachel quickly described her earlier interaction with the evangelist at the church, including her suspicions that had led her here. The police coordinated with a backup team to go to the evangelist's Airbnb for his arrest. "We're coming with you." Daniel insisted, his arm protectively around Eugene. The officers agreed, though they made it clear the family would need to remain in the police vehicle. Eugene refused to leave Rachel's side, clinging to her mother as if afraid she might disappear again. The other children and the dormitory keeper were placed in different cars, all bound for the police station. As they drove away, Rachel held her daughter close, hardly daring to believe that their nightmare was final, unworldly ending. When they arrived at the evangelist's Airbnb, multiple police cars already surrounded the property. Through the window of their police vehicle, Rachel watched as officers escorted the handcuffed evangelist from the house toward a waiting patrol car. Their eyes met briefly as he was led past, and Rachel felt a chill run through her. The photograph she had glimpsed earlier slipped from his pocket onto the ground. An officer retrieved it, bringing it to show Rachel and Daniel it was indeed a portrait of Eugene. There were also pictures of other children. At the police station, Rachel checked her phone while Eugene was being gently interviewed by a female officer in a special room designed for child witnesses. She had a missed call from Melissa, her fellow church staff member in Pine Hollow. She excused herself to return the call, stepping just outside the room where she could still see Eugene through the glass panel in the door. "Melissa, it's Rachel. Rachel, I've been trying to reach you. I found some troubling information about Evangelist Matthew. It seems he never completed seminary school like he claimed. We didn't catch that when we vetted him before his visit because we relied on the credentials he emailed us, which must have been forged. And that woman, the first-time visitor in the wheelchair, I would question the authenticity of her healing. She never returned to our church after Evangelist Matthew left. Rachel wasn't surprised. She had expected as much. We found Eugene Melissa. She's safe with us now." A gasp came from the other end of the line. "Oh, thank God. But what does this have to do with the evangelist?" "He's the one who took her," Rachel explained, her voice low. "There are other children, too. Police is still investigating the case." That's monstrous," Melissa whispered. "I did some more digging and I found that his real name is Derek Lanton. When I searched that name, I found an entirely different history than what he presented to us. Derek Lanton Rachel repeated the name, feeling venomous on her tongue. He used the credibility of the church to gain access to vulnerable children, and we invited him in. You couldn't have known Rachel. None of us could. After ending the call, Rachel ran a quick internet search for the name of Derek Lanton. The results confirmed what Melissa had said. The man they knew as Evangelist Matthew shared the same face as Derek Lanton, a man with a history of fraud charges in other states. Rachel returned to the family room, sharing what she'd learned with Daniel. I feel responsible, she admitted. I was the one who checked his credentials before we invited him to speak at our church. I should have been more thorough. Daniel shook his head. This isn't on you, Rachel. Con artists like him are experts at manipulation. You had no reason to suspect he was anything other than what he claimed to be. Number, it was all my mistake. Daniel saw her distress and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. God led us here, he said softly. What was meant for harm has been turned to good. Before they could discuss it further, Detective Morris entered the room. He was a serious-looking man in his 50s, with kind eyes that belied his stern expression. Eugene stood next to him. The family was escorted to a private room where Detective Morris joined them. Mr. and Mrs. Warren, he began taking a seat across from them. First, let me say how glad I am that you found your daughter. Cases like these don't often have such happy endings. Eugene had agreed to share all the details with you personally, even though she had told us everything about what had happened since her disappearance. After the baptism class, I was walking with my friends, but we split up at the corner, she explained. Father Matthew, that's what he made us call him, appeared in his car and told me Mom and Dad had been in a terrible accident. Rachel's heart clenched as Eugene continued. I believed him because we're a religious family, and I thought priests always told the truth. He took me to a funeral where I saw photos of Mom and Dad, and the coffins too. A fake funeral, Rachel whispered, horrified by the elaborate deception. Eugene nodded, tears filling her eyes. I couldn't believe it when I saw you today. I've prayed every day for you to return, even though Father Matthew said I'd only see you again in heaven. When asked what the man had done to her, Eugene explained he would take us in turns to his room. We'd watch movies and play board games. He said we were there to test and strengthen his faith in God. The rest of the interview focused on Rachel and Daniel, who provided their account of events. Rachel explained how she had found Eugene through a combination of coincidence, intuition, and persistence. Detective Morris explained that they had determined Matthew, or rather Derek Lanton, was a charismatic but manipulative predator who had preyed on the trust people placed in religious figures. He appears to have taken children while traveling between churches, the detective explained. He must have used forged credentials. We'll be investigating thoroughly. What happens now? Daniel asked, his arm protectively around Eugene. We've arrested both the man known as Evangelist Matthew for Derek Lanton, which is his real name, and his assistant Carla Benson. They're facing multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment. What about the other children? Rachel asked, thinking of the frightened faces she'd seen at the dormitory. We're searching databases and contacting their families, Morris assured them. They come from various states across the country, so reunification will take some time. But Eugene here is very fortunate, her family found her. After the interviews concluded, they stayed in the family room. Daniel apologized for doubting Rachel's intuition earlier and calling her a false prophet. Rachel smiled at the memory. We shouldn't lose faith just because one priest was a bad person, she said gently. It doesn't mean all churches are corrupt. After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Graham stood in the doorway, his face lined with distress. I hope I'm not intruding, he said hesitantly. Detective Morris invited him in, and the pastor approached the family, his hands clasped before him. I wanted to come personally to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We had no idea that we were harboring such evil in our midst. We've canceled tonight's service, of course. "This wasn't your fault either," Pastor Rachel said, surprising herself with her forgiveness. "He deceived everyone." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass wall of the family room, they could see the police leading Matthew Derrick across the station in handcuffs. Their eyes met briefly, and Rachel felt a chill run down her spine at the emptiness she saw there. Pastor Graham stepped forward again. "If you're staying in the area, I'd like to invite you to our prayer service next Sunday. Our congregation would be honored to celebrate Eugene's return with you, and perhaps your testimony might bring hope to others who are still searching for their loved ones." Rachel looked to Daniel, who nodded. "We'd be honored," she said. "After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again." Later, as they sat together in their Airbnb, Eugene sleeping peacefully between them, for the first time in 2 years, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A random tip, a Google Maps image, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced, all converging to create the miracle they had prayed for. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Daniel said softly, careful not to wake Eugene. "When you saw her on Google Maps, when you insisted on following Matthew's car, you were right all along." Rachel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Eugene's forehead. "Faith takes many forms," she said. "Sometimes it's about believing in what you can't see, and sometimes it's about trusting what you know in your heart to be true even when others doubt." Daniel reached across their sleeping daughter, taking Rachel's hand in his. "Our faith was tested in ways I never imagined possible. I nearly lost mine entirely. But not completely," Rachel noted. "You were still beside me, still searching, still hoping. Because of you," Daniel admitted, "your strength carried us both." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Eugene's steady breathing, each lost in their own thoughts about the remarkable journey that had led them here. A journey of loss and discovery, of doubt and faith, and ultimately of a family made whole again against impossible odds.